You are the first Saiyan to ever damage me like this, my nephew. You are a true warrior who is worthy of being a Saiyan. And so, I will give you a death that is also worthy of a Saiyan.
Gohan's greatest feat in Dragon Ball history is headbutting Raditz when he was a toddler. Now, many of you are going to nod your heads in disagreement, but here's the promise. If you stick around until the end of this video, everything will be explained clearly, as you will see why this feat is greater than his other feats. So where do we begin in this video? Well, we'd first directly have to compare Gohan to Goku, and see the life that Goku had, and see why Gohan is more impressive. And when we factor in that Goku was always a Saiyan who had a genetic advantage compared to his earthly peers, even though it was eventually revealed later on that Goku was a low-class Saiyan, Goku actually had an accelerated growth rate when he was extremely young. But the interesting thing about this is that we technically did not know that Goku was a Saiyan in Dragon Ball, but because the majority of us saw Dragon Ball Z first, we kind of already knew Goku was a Saiyan first, and then we had to rewire our brains into thinking that Goku was originally not known as a Saiyan, but that's another conversation for another day. The point is that when Goku was a kid, he got into many fights against very strong enemies for Earth standards. He defeated the Red Ribbon Army, he trained with Master Roshi, he defeated King Piccolo, he fought against Piccolo Jr., and he also defeated Ten Shenron outwardly the second time that they fought. And with all of that said, Goku became the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai winner and was the strongest man in the world, with the only other man, even though both Goku and Piccolo aren't technically men, they're aliens, but if you want to use that term, would have been Piccolo. So, with all of that said, Goku went through all of these fights and also got a lot of theoretical Zenkai boosts on top of having all of these fights. Because remember, obviously the concept of a Zenkai boost didn't come into what we would call Dragon Ball Z, even though it was all originally Dragon Ball, but you get where we're going at here. That concept didn't come in until the later part of the series, but we did know that if Zenkai boosts are theoretical, that means Goku got a lot of theoretical Zenkai boosts on top of all of the fights that he had. And despite all of that, when Raditz shows up, he has to team up with the strongest person on the planet, who's not a good guy, to fight Raditz together. And as Goku and Piccolo fight together, they both get completely thrashed. So how does everything eventually get solved? Well, a random toddler with no fighting experience, no emotional control, and a very pampered, high-quality, comfortable lifestyle just gets a temper tantrum and charges towards Raditz, and hits him hard enough that Goku can grab onto him and eventually sacrifice his life to kill him. Now, the thing that we have to factor in is we just talked about all of the many things that Goku has done. Have you ever wondered all of the fights that Raditz has had throughout his entire life? When you factor in all of the theoretical Zenkai boosts that Raditz may have gotten fighting alongside Vegeta and Nappa and himself in outer space, all of the battle experience that Raditz has gained, especially because he was a higher class Saiyan than what Goku was, at least at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. And in addition to that, Gohan moved so fast. You see, there's one thing to talk about power, but to have the speed to hit a character as fast as Raditz, when Raditz was directly avoiding special beam cannons, as you saw when he avoided Piccolo's special beam cannon, and he also just easily pushed away a fully powered up Kamehameha from Goku. And when you factor in something else, that Goku had to hold on to Raditz for Piccolo to kill him, that also makes this point even stronger. Because if Goku didn't do that, Raditz could have avoided the special beam cannon too, which even goes to show how powerful and how fast Gohan was in that small moment. But you're probably wondering, how does this moment compare to Gohan's other feats throughout Dragon Ball history? And to be specific, his moment against Raditz was what we would call pure latent potential, whereas the feats later on were basically just accomplishments that were stacked on top of an already trained character. Because at that point of the series, Goku and Piccolo had already molded Gohan into fighting in their own style, and the things that were unlocked afterwards were basically just putting icing on the cake. A good example to illustrate this would be Gohan raging out against Frieza. This moment took place after Guru had already unlocked his hidden ability at that particular point in the series, and this was also after Gohan had already trained with Piccolo, and also had a lot of fighting experience fighting alongside Krillin and the others throughout Dragon Ball history, so this was a trained moment. Granted, the emotional outburst enhanced his abilities, But Gohan was already a trained, developed character by that point. And then when we move on to another point throughout Dragon Ball history, we have Gohan turning Super Saiyan 2. Now remember, the very fact that Gohan was able to turn into a Super Saiyan 2 was because Goku and Gohan were specifically training to find that transformation, and Gohan was able to accomplish it with an emotional outburst against Cell, and by training with Goku in the Room of Spirit and Time. But once again, this is what we were talking about before with having a mold. The groundwork was already done for Gohan to become a Super Saiyan 2 because he was already a very well-trained Super Saiyan with Goku and Gohan training to become full-power Super Saiyans and having that level of control. So it was a lot easier for Gohan to become a Super Saiyan 2 based off of all of the groundwork that was done in that particular case. And then when we look at Ultimate Gohan, that's also a very similar situation to what happened with Guru. Ultimate Gohan was essentially born because even though Gohan did not really train over the course of those 7 years, the Elder Kai unlocked his ability and just in the blink of an eye, Gohan was able to compete against Super Buu, when in fact he couldn't even compete against Fat Buu before that. And we're being generous by saying that too because Gohan was struggling just to defeat Deborah. So essentially, in the case of the Elder Kai was just scraping the barrel to find more latent potential for Gohan that he just used like turning on a switch, and it was that latent potential that was stacked on top of a more developed character that had already learned Super Saiyan 2, that had already fought in the Room of Spirit and Time, that had already trained with Goku and Piccolo, and it was just even more icing on the cake. Now when we get to Dragon Ball Super, we have a very interesting situation because we have the character of Beast Gohan, which was unlocked after Gohan had trained with Goku and Piccolo in Dragon Ball Super and had already pushed himself in the Tournament of Power. Now to make this point even more clear, we can even mention the fight that Gohan had against Kefla in the manga. If we want to count the manga continuity as part of what Gohan did against Max Cell, well, let's factor in that Gohan also was able to fight against Kefla, which goes to show that, at least beforehand, what he was doing in preparation for the Tournament of Power and the battles that he had was still impressive in its own right. And the strongest point that we will make in this video is actually Future Gohan, because Future Gohan is essentially a metaphor for what Gohan would have been if he didn't have all of those unlock abilities and all of the training that he got in the main timeline. Even though he still technically got Guru's unlock ability on planet Namek. But when we look at Future Gohan, we gotta admit that it is somewhat impressive what he managed to do, as he did become a Super Saiyan on his own with no help, and he did manage to train Trunks to be strong enough to train himself in the future and give him good groundwork on how to fight on his own. So that was impressive on Future Gohan's part, but he never accomplished anywhere near the things as the present mainline Gohan did, because he didn't have all of that assistance. And if we're more specific, if you look at the future timeline specifically, Gohan makes it pretty clear that he looks at Trunks as having more potential than him. Now obviously you can say that's because Gohan had one arm and Trunks was a lot younger, so even if Gohan theoretically had the potential, it could never be realized because he was already damaged goods by the time that Trunks was already getting strong enough to potentially rival the androids in the future, and around that time Gohan had already died. But what makes Future Gohan an even sadder story is when we look at the fact that in the manga he was an even weaker character. So, when you look at the fact that the anime basically made him a lot stronger than what he was in the manga, it's still impressive what Future Gohan managed to do, but it really goes to show you that Gohan's potential wasn't all that with all of that much help. However, if there's one impressive thing about Future Gohan in the manga that we can mention, it's the fact that he managed to train with the Super Saiyan Teen Trunks with one arm in his base form, which is impressive in its own sense, and it also is even more impressive how much stronger Trunks got on his own after Gohan had died, when he basically lost the person that was responsible for his biggest power gains. And even if you say Dragon Ball GT is not canon, it is important to note that Dragon Ball GT does follow a similar storyline to Future Gohan. With basically absolutely no training and no fighting at all, you can see how weak Gohan was in GT, where it really appeared like there was no real difference between himself and Goten. There might be minuscule differences, as Baby was more impressed to upgrade from Goten's body to eventually Gohan's, but as you can see, none of it was really that impressive. So ultimately guys, Gohan basically skipped an entire series worth of villains when he headbutted Raditz, and in less than a year he eventually got stronger than his father was as a kid by training with Piccolo and surviving alone in the wild. So for all of these reasons, the reason why this is Gohan's greatest feat ever is because this is the most independent feat that Gohan has ever had with absolutely no assistance. This was pure potential fired at a character that is theoretically way above what Gohan could ever conceive of being as a toddler with no training.